Thank you for joining us here today at Retail Revival, the digital conference for e-commerce and retail marketers, where we're putting the customer back into commerce. I'm Ross Williams, the Global VP of Retail at Emarsys. In this session, I'm privileged to be joined by Matthew Thurnu, the Global Commercial Director from Locate, where he's responsible for strategy and innovation for GBG's location intelligence solution. Today, Matthew's going to be talking about the future of digital checkout. We all know that over the past 12 to 18 months, digital retail has been in hypergrowth. With hypergrowth, there have been growing pains that have forced brands to adapt to ensure that they can continue to grow and improve the customer journey as they do so. Mobile is one of the areas of accelerated adoption, with mobile contactless payment in retail stores booming, shopping on mobile websites and apps being the primary method of shopping for many, and the unexpected rebirth of QR codes to either check in at locations or access new digital ordering capabilities in restaurants and bars. 2020 and 2021 are the years of consumers being truly mobile first. In this session today, Matthew will cover how brands' checkouts coped with the last 12 to 18 months peaks, what consumers expect from a digital journey of the future and how friction is not always a bad thing, what brands should be considering to capitalize on the accelerated mobile commerce growth, and how location data and emerging technologies can support a more streamlined experience. Without further ado, Matthew, over to you.
Thanks, Ross, and appreciate the introduction. And it's great to be here and have an opportunity to talk about what is clearly a really timely subject for us all to be thinking about, given where we are over the last 12, 18 months. Just a quick comment on our introduction to Locate. If you've not heard of Locate, we specialize in location technologies, particularly for the e-commerce and retail sector, although we work with sectors across a wide variety of areas that are concerned about ensuring they capture good quality and accurate customer data at registration or checkout. So we provide websites the ability to capture a customer address in just a few keystrokes, and we do that for pretty much every place in the world, which powers cross-border commerce, which is a really important part of a lot of retailers' growth strategies today. So we won't talk too much more about Locate, but we're proud to work with more than 19,000 brands worldwide, including some of the leading brands, many of which I'm sure are on the program of Retail Revival over these couple of days. So we wanted to start just by sharing our perspective on kind of what went on over the last sort of 15 months or so, but really with an eye to what that tells us about what we can do going forward to improve customer experience and to help us to get a better sense of what is the future of the checkout, what are consumer expectations, and what can we do both as technology providers but also as retailers to keep up with those fast changing consumer expectations. Well, as we look at the graph that's up on screen, we've probably all got used to this shape of graph over the course of the first lockdown, the easing of restrictions, the second lockdown, through the holiday period, and then on into what is hopefully going to become a slightly more normal year in 2021. I think as we look at the phases that emerged in 2020, that gives us a better opportunity to predict and to respond to whatever the next phases are as we see the easing of lockdowns and a more normal and predictable trading environment. But even though we could just look at that graph up and down and think, well, people came online and they've gone back to the high street again, it's probably important to reflect upon the mix of who your shoppers are now. Because what we did see, and the evidence tells us over that period of time, that some cohorts came online in much, much greater numbers than ever before, baby boomers being a great example. For some of those, it was under duress. So they didn't choose to become online shoppers. They kind of had no other choice. So retailers have got a really, really exciting opportunity to keep them online where it's appropriate by making their experience suitable to their own preferences and also their experiences and their experience online. We know that Gen X's have become even more likely to be loyal to the brands that give them a relevant and personalized experience. And then you've got pretty much everybody else, and you're competing for their attention and to make their experience online as relevant and as personal as it possibly can be. I want to make the point during the course of today's session that there are some things that are pretty concrete and a little bit binary, But then there's an awful lot of nuance and there's a lot of detail that we can think about when it comes to answering that question of what is the future of the digital checkout. And this quote here is probably a good anchor point for how we view and how we think about our online shoppers. That almost all, in this survey, 92% of consumers, what do they demand? A fast and frictionless and safe checkout experience. The only thing that surprises me about that figure of 92% is that it's not higher. I wonder who the 8% are that are ambivalent about these things. But we can say most online shoppers care about something which for them is frictionless and safe and fast. But then it gets interesting because that doesn't apply the same way to everybody. Clearly, we're all different and our journeys online will be for different reasons. So we're different as consumers. The reason that we're online shopping is different. The thing that we're buying will differ whether or not we want more or less friction. Maybe why we're buying something, is it for ourselves or are we gifting? So all these different factors will play into how retailers can adapt and to develop and innovate their checkout so that it remains absolutely appropriate for the individual consumer.
Really, really interesting stuff, Matt. Just talking about those differences, what sort of differences and experiences do you think these different customer groups will want?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we think about that through the lens of the right amount of friction in a checkout, we've started to see sort of phrases like desirable friction or appropriate friction sort of coming into the lexicon. And what do we mean by that? Well, if I'm reordering bin bags from Amazon, I want to be able to do that in a heartbeat. I don't want any friction at all. It's not a transaction that I'm getting any particular pleasure from. It's just transactional, and I need to complete that. And indeed, that's where voice commerce starts to play its part. That's probably one of the few examples of where I do buy stuff just by calling out to Alexa, really basic, low value, repeat items. At the other end of the spectrum, we were talking recently to the head of e-commerce at Fender Guitars. So if you're a guitar person like I am, and you like the brand, if you're on fender.com and you're buying a guitar for £1,500, £2,000 or more, how quick do you want that checkout experience to be? Well, for most shoppers, the answer would be not quick at all. This is a real heart purchase. Maybe you can't get to a store, or maybe the item that you want isn't available in your local guitar store. So in that case, Fender put in lots of appropriate friction to slow the process down, make it a really nice buying experience, to offer associated and affiliated purchases, whether it's online teaching, or guitar strap, nice strings, or some other additional purchase, so that you can really kind of relax into that journey. And that's probably the two ends of the extreme. And then, of course, you've got lots of different variants in between that, which might relate to the value of the item, let's say what it means to you, whether it's something which is a luxury or a day-to-day item. So I'm kind of really excited by this sort of theme of appropriate and desirable friction, because it does challenge maybe what we've always thought, which is the best thing to do is just to strip out, constantly simplify, remove steps. As we go on to later on, I think there are places where you should do that, but actually the buying experience sometimes will be a better one for the consumer if we're allowing that appropriate level of friction to stay in, so that the buying experience is enhanced.
Yeah, I completely get what you're saying there. I mean, there used to be that old theory that you shouldn't have too many clicks to do things, and you should reduce everything to 2 clicks maximum, because after that you lose customers. But the reality is, if there is value in the click, then customers are happy to do that. It doesn't cause dropout. You've just got to make sure it is a valuable click rather than clicking for clicking's sake. Have you got any examples that you can share with us around this appropriate friction and what brands are actually doing in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a few, I think, really innovative and exciting examples that are blazing the trail for how to make the experience more personalized, at times introducing additional steps, but ultimately to try and drive conversion. So the first example is Nordstrom, who are a large, established, very successful department store retailer in the US. So Nordstrom have always innovated around their online experience. But when it comes to gifting, the example we're just showing here is not just making gifting, do you want to change the shipping address, which is what a lot of sites will do. But now starting to offer some nice personalized gifting options, whether that's the way in which it's wrapped, thinking about other sort of small relevant additions to the gift, so that the purchase itself isn't just a transactional purchase, but you now be able to give some thought and some personalized attention to the thing that you're buying. And I think that probably represents a direction of travel for retailers in making that gifting experience, where some of us will maybe linger over that a little bit more, be a bit more thoughtful, and maybe even spend a bit more because it's a gift to a loved one. I think probably the sidebar to this is a good example where streamlined but accurate address capture is so important, because you or I, if we're asked for our address, I suspect we can give it over, first time accurately every time. If we're sending something to a loved one, we might know where they live if we drive to it, but actually we might not know the accurate address that we want something sent to. So having something in place which allows for an address that we're not familiar with to be captured accurately, not just necessarily in the country where we live, maybe we've got relatives and friends living overseas, and then it becomes even more complicated. So I think this area around gifting is a really interesting one to see develop. Another example was with a brand, Regency Hampers. Again, that's very oriented towards gifting. What they're doing is some really clever stuff around split delivery. So in the case of one transaction, you can actually break that down, put in separate delivery addresses, one billing address, and complete that within a single transaction, which I think is really clever, because you're trying to take more and more of someone's, potentially their gifting activity, into a single transaction without giving them the option maybe to think, well, maybe I should go and buy one of these items on a different site. And again, the aspect of accurate delivery addresses is also one that's important there. But then we get into some of the really cool stuff, and I know Emarsys are doing a lot of work around this personalization as well, and maybe hear about that in a moment. Charlotte Tilbury, who we've worked with for a number of years, have got some just really clever personalization tech going on below the surface, using AI and machine learning. And the way in which they're helping to learn customers' preferences is through virtual try-ons, which is probably not something that you or I may be particularly experienced in, but being able to, again, linger in the purchase, see how things actually look on you. And in doing so, the clever tech is then thinking about and aggregating your preferences and responses so that you get a more personalized experience next time. And the final example on personalization, which again is just really cool, it's a Function of Beauty are really investing a lot in their AI capability. So using gamification, using quizzes. So, all consent-based, these are answers that you're volunteering, but in doing so, it's training the algorithm so that what you're getting each time you visit the site is going to be more and more personalized to you. And it feels to me like when we think about the future of the checkout, it's just going to become more and more personalized, particularly in the areas of products which are either luxury purchases, higher value purchases, gifting, maybe not so much at the Amazon bin bag end of the spectrum, but particularly those types of purchase journeys.
Yeah, the personalization piece that you mentioned, and the progressive profiling of customers through these sorts of kind of product matching tools or the quizzes and competitions, capturing that sort of data enables you to personalize better. It enables you to understand your customers better and provide them with that personalized experience. So there's some really interesting stuff going on in that area right now. We talked a lot about mobile at the beginning. What have you seen around optimizing for mobile, Matt?
So we've all observed that design and UX for mobile is a critical contributor to conversion. So there's some simple things that most online brands will be doing. We recognize that the available real estate on a small mobile screen is a lot less than even on a tablet or a larger at-home device. So ensuring that what the customer is being presented with, again, is relevant to the journey that they're on, the item they're buying, the value, the purpose. And there's a couple of ways to go around that. One is just simply to remove extraneous or unnecessary things that don't need to be part of that journey. Another way would be to start to make it more personal, so that the things that appear on the mobile screen are truly relevant to that particular shopper. coming back to Locate's role in the world, one of the biggest offenders when it comes to cluttering a small sort of checkout screen is putting in 3 or 4 address fields to complete. What a waste of space when you can actually capture that all important data using potentially just a single field. So I think around that, we've got aspects of where that device happens to be, where the consumer's allowed that data to be shared through consent. Then your location is again an interesting factor as to the type of purchase that you're making, the reason that you're making it. If you're buying hot food, you probably want the mobile to be communicating where you are so that you can receive that really quickly. We'll touch on that at the end. But I think we're seeing a lot of mobile development around less sort of sharing of lots and lots of personal data, but rather creating a simple, elegant checkout experience, which removes some of the things that aren't potentially required. I think an interesting side thing to that point, Ross, is some of the discussions we've been having recently with e-commerce leaders is there's a lot more, or perhaps a more relaxed approach to the conversion rates on a mobile. So I was talking to the head of e-commerce at Land's End in the US recently, and she was explaining that they expect a much lower conversion rate on mobile. They're a lot more comfortable with browse rather than buy. So as such, the design of the mobile experience doesn't necessarily need just to force everyone through quickly. They're quite happy just to get folks to put things into the basket and maybe come back and look later. Whereas on a tablet or a larger at-home device, it's more likely that the customer's going to be happy with other things being positioned around that purchase journey. Suggestions, would you also like to buy? So it's thinking about the expectations from a mobile journey, as well as the expectations that you might have from a different type of device experience.
Yeah. I mean, I spent a lot of time optimizing for mobile back in my days, M Brown and Tesco. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to ensure that your mobile experience is suitable for mobile and the mobile user. We had some massive wins redesigning the checkout over at Tesco. I seem to remember we managed to reduce the abandonment rate by about 10 percentage points just through thinking through, what fields were absolutely necessary for a checkout to take place, and how do you make as many of those pre-populated as possible so that you're not putting additional strain on the user. So yeah, there's definitely lots to go at in the mobile space, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's where we see the very fast rise of the embedded or pre-populated payment services. So I don't know about you, but I use Apple Pay all the time. We might use PayPal, Samsung Pay, Alipay in other parts of the world. So we think about the role of those checkout payment services. How much of the heavy lifting are those services doing, which remove the need for shoppers to enter some of that sort of basic non-changing data? And I think there's a real role for those services to play. I think a really good example of where you see a kind of a hybrid between what's pre-populated and what the brand asks you for is John Lewis, a customer of Locate's, where although you can choose any of those embedded payment services, before you get to that point, John Lewis will always ask you for your address. And the reason being is that if you select click and collect, they want to be able to check that there's stock availability in your area. They want to be able to tell you how quickly they can get it to your local Waitrose or John Lewis store, and therefore set your expectation at the earliest opportunity. So I've had some discussions with retailers that are kind of hoping that if someone uses Apple Pay, they don't really have to capture anything from the customer at all, their name, their address there. And I think there's probably a balance to be struck. Apple Pay will perhaps have your billing address, but if it's gifting, you'll still need to think about the location of the recipient. And if it's click and collect or buy online, pick up in store, as is in the US, you need to be thinking about the proper location of that transaction, as that might differ to other transactions that you make on a repeated basis.
Yeah, well, Matt, listen, we're coming up on time. You've covered off loads of great stuff there. From talking about friction less versus good friction, talking through the mobile experience, making sure that it's as slick as possible. Are there any final points that you would like to cover off before we wrap up?
Oh, I just wish we had longer, Ross. I think I'd reflect back on some research that we conducted just at the end of last year during the holiday period, and what came through really clearly is that when brands not only put an appropriate journey and checkout experience in place, but make it clear that they are really working hard to take accurate data from a shopper and to ensure that that shopper's needs and their sort of requirements and expectations are met, that they have much higher levels of trust in that brand. So I think whenever we're thinking about simplicity, making things easy, quick and convenient for shoppers online, also add in that kind of fourth point of trust. Do things that evidence that you are creating a safe and trustworthy experience. And that can be around, you know, the data that you capture, but also a journey that feels personalized and that feels appropriate to a particular transaction, particular shopper. We see in the evidence that builds levels of trust, and therefore that shopper is going to come back and shop with you again. So I think we've touched on some of the things that I think are going to happen and are happening. I think it'll be fascinating in 3-5 years' time to look back and see where we got to.
Yeah, well, thank you, Matt, for sharing all of your valuable insights and experience with us today. I'm certain that the audience will have learned a lot. I certainly did. I'd like to say a big thank you to you, Matt, our speaker. Viewers, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us here today at Retail Revival. We're always happy to hear from you, so please feel free to contact us if any of today's content inspired you or left you with any further questions. Here at Retail Revival, we have over 60 hours of content from global retail brands and industry thought leaders. So please ensure you've signed up to all the sessions you want to so you don't miss out. That's all from us here, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Ross.